The U.S. and Russia kicking off high-stakes security talks today. As we watch the Russian military build up around Ukraine, Moscow is demanding an end to NATO's eastern expansion, urging the United States to stop Ukraine from potentially joining NATO. The Biden administration is threatening sanctions if Russian leader Vladimir Putin does invade Ukraine, also considering measures to curb Russian energy exports. Joining me right now is former senior advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. She's executive vice president at Stevens Inc. and senior policy advisor Mary Kissel. Mary, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me back, Maria. Happy New Year to you.
Mary, assess the situation. You've got troops on the Ukraine border from Russia. You also now have these Russian troops in Kazakhstan. How do you see things?
Well, President Putin likes to create problems, which he then offers to solve. And this isn't the first time that he's done this. He did it in Syria during the Obama administration. He did it previously in Ukraine. And he's essentially setting the agenda. Unfortunately, the Biden administration is taking the bait, agreeing to talks, and that gives Putin really an upper hand. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that NATO threatens Russia or that there should be any sort of concessions here. If anything, we shouldn't be at the table. We should be arming Ukraine, making it difficult and costly if Putin were to intervene. Because honestly, Maria, Putin does not go into situations where he thinks he's going to face great resistance or situations where he thinks it would be detrimental to his political standing at home. So those are the two things that we should be trying to make difficult for him right now.
Mary, what should the Biden administration be doing? I mean, you've said that it's a bad sign to see Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman taking this lead role in the discussions with Russia. We've seen her take lead roles before, haven't we?
Yeah, it's not just the fact that we've acceded to talks and have even hinted that we might make concessions to Moscow for really no reason at all. It's also who we're sending to the talks. Wendy Sherman doesn't get a lot of attention in the press, but she should. She's the Deputy Secretary of State, but she's negotiated two prior deals that resulted in failure. The first one was the agreed framework with North Korea under the Clinton administration. Of course, North Korea broke that agreement almost as soon as the ink was dry on the paper. And then she was a key player in the negotiation of the Iran nuclear deal. And powers like Russia take notice of that. I think we tend to think of these problems as bilateral problems, Maria. We have a Russia problem or an Iran problem or an Afghanistan or a North Korea problem. That's not true. These powers watch what we do in every corner of the world, and they learn from us. And I think, Putin is often characterized as this great strategist and genius, but I'm not so sure that's true. I think he's just taking advantage of our naivete. Another problem that Blinken has, our Secretary of State, is that he's dealing with a disunited Europe. Recall, too, that Russia would not have this kind of leverage over places like Germany with things like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Germany hadn't supported the construction of it. So if that's on the table, it shouldn't be a negotiation over whether or not we open Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 shouldn't open under any circumstances. So that's something else to watch as these talks progress.
Well, I don't understand the motivation of Joe Biden then and this administration. You've got mass anti-government protests breaking out across Kazakhstan over the past week, Russia flooding the country with thousands of troops there, supporting the government there. I guess that move, pulling the former Soviet republic closer to Russia, sends a signal to the United States and its allies, Mary. Same situation with China. I mean, you're talking about these adversaries watching what we're doing, following the political debates in America and piling on. China has been doing that through its propaganda, quote unquote, media for the last several years, if not beyond, right?
Yes, that's true. I saw that throughout my time at the State Department. One thing to note about Kazakhstan is, we often see periods of political unrest when you have economic distress. We saw that in 1989 with the Tiananmen Square protests. You're seeing it now in Kazakhstan with rising energy prices. And the question is, what can or should the United States do? And that's something that the Biden administration is really grappling with here. Their first instinct is to talk. There's nothing wrong with talking. But what they really need to do is to make a cold calculation here about what's in the U.S. national interest, what our partners are willing to do, what we're willing to do within the constraints that we have. And in terms of Kazakhstan, we're not probably going to send troops into Kazakhstan. We can support the people there. We have significant energy investments. Some 40% of uranium is produced there. But I think there's a greater national interest in Ukraine than there may be in Central Asia, although, of course, you don't want to see the Russian power extend over Kazakhstan once again as it did in Soviet times.
Yeah, it's great analysis, as always, from you, Mary. Good to see you. Thanks very much. Mary Kissel joining us this morning.